My daughter-in-law announced that my responsibility would be babysitting her 5 kids every weekend. She didn't ask me. She announced it. There is a particular kind of silence that follows a statement like that. Not the comfortable silence of a room at peace, but the kind that presses against your chest. The kind that asks you to decide in real time who you are and what you are willing to accept. I was sitting at her dining room table, the one my son Marcus had built with his own hands the summer before they married, the one I had admired every time I visited because it reminded me of the boy who used to build things in our garage just to prove he could. I was holding a cup of tea I had not been offered but had made myself because that was the kind of guest I had become in my own son's life. Self-sufficient, undemanding, grateful for whatever corner of the room I was allowed to occupy. And Denise, my daughter-in-law, sat across from me with the calm confidence of someone delivering a scheduling memo, not dismantling another person's retirement, and said the words that would change everything between us. We've decided that Saturdays and Sundays you'll take the kids, all 5. It just makes the most sense given your situation. Your situation. I was 67 years old. I had worked for 38 years. I had buried a husband, raised a son alone for 11 of those years, and spent the last decade quietly making myself smaller so I would fit into the life Marcus had built with this woman. And now my situation, my retirement, my earned rest, my remaining years was being quietly folded into a childcare schedule I had no part in creating. I smiled, I nodded, I finished the tea I had made myself. But something shifted in me that afternoon. Something that had been bending for years finally decided it was done bending. What happened in the weeks that followed was not what Denise expected. It was not what Marcus expected. And if I am being honest, it was not entirely what I expected either. But it was necessary, and it was mine. My name is Gloria Reeves. I am 67 years old, and I live in a small but carefully kept house on Birchwood Lane in Asheville, North Carolina, a city where the mountains sit so close to the downtown that on clear mornings you can see their outline from the farmer's market on the square. I moved to Asheville 14 years ago, after Marcus took a position with an engineering firm in the area. I followed because that is what I did. I followed Marcus the way mothers follow their children, not out of desperation, but out of love, so habitual it no longer announced itself. Before Asheville, I was a high school English teacher for 38 years in Richmond, Virginia. I taught literature and composition. I taught children how to find the words for things they could not yet name. I like to think some of them remember me. I know I remember most of them. My husband, Raymond, died 11 years into our marriage from a sudden cardiac event. Marcus was 9 years old. From that morning forward, it was the two of us, my son and I, building something that looked like a family from the materials grief left behind. We were good at it. We were better than good. We were for many years enough for each other. Marcus met Denise 8 years ago at a conference. She was organized, ambitious, and certain about everything in a way that I initially found refreshing and later found exhausting. They married quickly. The children came in rapid succession, twins first, then another, then another, then a 5th. 5 children in 6 years, each one beautiful, each one loud, each one wholly innocent of the adult architecture being constructed around them. I adored those children. I want that stated clearly and kept close, because everything that follows must be understood in the light of that love. Whatever I did not do it despite loving those 5 children. I did it because of it. Because love without boundaries is not protection. It is surrender. And surrendered grandmothers are not good for anyone, least of all the grandchildren who deserve to know a woman who still has something left to give. My house on Birchwood Lane has a garden in the back that I tend myself. Tomatoes, lavender, 2 rose bushes. Raymond's mother gave us as a wedding gift that I carried from Richmond, wrapped in damp newspaper, like something precious, which they were. There is a reading chair by the window that faces east so the morning light falls across whatever book I am holding. There is a kettle that whistles. There is quiet. There was quiet. The first time I understood my position in Denise's household, I said nothing. It was the twins' first birthday. I had driven 40 minutes across town with a handmade cake, lemon sponge with buttercream, Raymond's mother's recipe, the one I had been making for every significant occasion since 1987, and a hand-sewn quilt for each baby. 2 months of weekend work, fabric chosen carefully, one with small bears, one with small birds, because even at 1 year old, I believed children deserved to be seen as individuals. Denise's mother, Patricia, had organized the party. Patricia lived 12 minutes from Marcus and Denise. Patricia had an opinion about everything and stated all of them with the authority of someone who had never been wrong, or at least had never noticed when she was. The cake I brought was placed on the kitchen counter out of sight. The cake Patricia brought, from a bakery, fondant decorations, the babies' names in gold lettering, was placed on the party table. I do not believe this was an accident. I ate a slice of the bakery cake and said the frosting was delicious because it was, and because I was the kind of woman who could find something honest to say even when honesty required searching. That was the first thing. The second thing came 6 months later when Denise informed me during a Sunday lunch I had cooked entirely by myself that she and Marcus had decided the children would only use Mandarin and English at home, and that since I spoke neither Mandarin nor any language other than English, I should probably limit how much time I spent talking to the children during their language acquisition years. She said this the way people say things they have rehearsed. Carefully, with a layer of reasonableness shellacked over the top so that any objection would seem like an overreaction. I am their grandmother, I thought. Language acquisition years. As if I were a variable in an experiment rather than a person who had waited 5 years for grandchildren with the specific and patient hope that I would know them. I said nothing. I passed the bread rolls. The third thing, the fourth, the fifth, they accumulated the way water finds its way through small cracks. Never dramatic enough to name as catastrophic. Always just enough to remind me of my place. The year Marcus turned 40, Denise organized a surprise party. Extended family, colleagues, old university friends. 40 people in their house on a Saturday evening. I found out about it the following Monday when Marcus called to tell me how well it had gone. I had not been invited. When I mentioned this gently to Marcus, he said he thought I knew. He thought Denise had called me. There was a long pause between us in which neither of us said what we both understood. I was not there for my son's 40th birthday because his wife had not included me, and my son had not noticed until it was over. I bought him a birthday gift anyway. I mailed it. I wrote a card. Inside I wrote, 40 years of watching you become someone remarkable. I am so proud of you. I meant every word. I also cried for an hour after I sealed the envelope, sitting at the kitchen table on Birchwood Lane while the kettle went cold on the stove. There were good moments, too. I need to say that because without them, the story becomes simpler than it was, and simple stories tell less truth than complicated ones. There were Sunday afternoons when all 5 children would pile into my garden, and I would let them dig in the soil and pick tomatoes and chase each other through the lavender until their clothes were green at the knees. There were evenings when Marcus would stay after Denise had taken the children home, and we would sit together in the way we used to sit, comfortable and unhurried, and he would tell me things he did not tell anyone else. Those moments were real. They existed alongside the other moments. That is the honest shape of it. But the honest shape included this. I had been slowly, consistently, and I believe deliberately repositioned, not as the matriarch of a family, not as a grandmother with standing and voice and a seat at the table, but as a resource, useful when required, invisible when not. I was Raymond's wife for 20 years and his widow for 27 more. I was a teacher who spent her life giving other people's children words for their experiences. I was Marcus's mother through the years when we had very little and made it work through sheer force of love and stubbornness. I had earned my place in this family the hard way, the only way things worth having are ever earned. And still, on that Tuesday afternoon in Denise's kitchen with the tea I had made myself growing cold in my hands, I was being told that my remaining years, my Saturdays and my Sundays, the slow mornings and the quiet afternoons I had worked 38 years to reach, belonged to someone else's schedule. All 5 children, every weekend, because it just makes the most sense given your situation. Let me tell you exactly how she said it. We had been talking about the children's schedules, which had become enormously complicated since Denise had accepted a promotion that required her to work occasional Saturdays. Marcus's hours had extended. The firm had taken on a significant new contract, and the demands on his time had grown proportionally. These were real pressures. I understood them. I had been helping where I could, collecting the children from school twice a week, appearing on short notice when one of them was ill, bringing meals on the evenings I could see from Marcus's voice on the phone that they were drowning. I did not do these things because I was asked. I did them because they were my grandchildren and my son, and that is what love looks like in practice rather than theory. What I did not do, what I had never agreed to, was surrender the entire shape of my retirement to a standing arrangement that no one had discussed with me. Denise had her laptop open on the kitchen table. She was looking at a calendar. She spoke to the calendar more than she spoke to me. "We've mapped it out," she said. "If you take them Saturday morning through Sunday evening, that covers everything. Marcus and I can actually have 2 days to function like adults. The kids love being with you, so it's not like it's a hardship for them. And honestly, Gloria, what else do you have going on?" "What else do you have going on?" I was quiet for a moment. The refrigerator hummed. Outside, one of the children was doing something in the garden that involved a great deal of running and at least one collision with something hollow and metallic. "I have quite a lot going on," I said, which was both true and insufficient as a response to what had just happened. Denise looked up from the laptop then. She had the expression of someone who had expected a different answer and was recalibrating. "I just mean, you're retired, you have the time. And we really need this, Gloria. The kids need consistency." The kids need consistency. She was not wrong about that. Children do need consistency. What they also need are grandparents who have not been hollowed out by obligation, grandparents who show up because they choose to, not because they have been scheduled like a recurring appointment that no one bothered to confirm. I looked at my daughter-in-law across the kitchen table. She was 39 years old. She was capable and driven and genuinely devoted to her children in the way that people who control everything are devoted. Completely, but on their own terms. She was not a cruel woman. I want to be clear about that. Cruelty would have been easier to respond to. What she was someone who had never once considered that I might have an interior life that did not revolve around her family's logistics. "Let me think about it," I said. She looked surprised. I think she had expected either immediate agreement or a negotiation about which weekends. She had not expected to be told she would have to wait. "We kind of need to know soon," she said. "We've already turned down a babysitter because we assumed you'd be doing it." There it was. The decision had already been made. I had already been assigned. The conversation was not a request. It was a notification. I set my cup down on the table, gathered my cardigan from the back of the chair, and said that I would call Marcus that evening. Then I walked out of Denise's kitchen, got into my car, and drove home to Birchwood Lane. I sat in the reading chair facing east until the light changed. Then I made a real pot of tea, sat at the kitchen table, and began to think with the full and careful attention I used to give to lesson plans, deliberately, methodically, and without sentimentality. By the time the tea was finished, I knew what I was going to do. And I knew with the quiet certainty that only comes from having spent 67 years learning yourself that I was not going to apologize for any of it. What Denise did not know, what Marcus only partially knew, was that retirement had not made me passive. It had made me purposeful in ways I had not been able to be while working. In the 3 years since I stopped teaching, I had done a great deal of living that no one in my son's household had bothered to ask about. I had joined a memoir writing group that met every Thursday at the downtown library. We were 7 women and 1 man, ranging in age from 58 to 81. And we had collectively lived enough life to fill several libraries. I had been working on a piece about Raymond, about the years after he died, about what grief looks like from the inside, when you have a 9-year-old watching your face for information about whether the world is still safe. My instructor, a woman named Constance, who had published 2 books and had the kind of directness that made you feel respected rather than criticized, had told me 3 months ago that my writing had real merit, that I should consider doing something with it. I had also, 6 months prior, enrolled in a watercolor course at the Art Center on Lexington Avenue. I was not talented in the way that produces gallery-worthy work, but I was improving. And more importantly, I was spending 2 hours every Tuesday afternoon in a room full of people who were concentrating on something beautiful. And that concentration felt like medicine. And I had, for the past 2 years, been a volunteer reader at the elementary school 4 blocks from Birchwood Lane. Every Friday morning from 9 until 11, I sat with small children who were learning that letters meant sounds, and sounds meant words, and words meant everything. And I watched their faces change when the meaning landed, that specific and irreplaceable expression of a child understanding something for the first time. I had been a teacher for 38 years, and I recognized that expression the way you recognize the face of someone you love. My Saturdays had a rhythm I had built carefully. The farmer's market in the morning, where I had a standing conversation with a woman named Ruth who sold goat cheese and had opinions about everything worth having opinions about. Then the garden, then reading, then often a long walk through the neighborhood that I used for thinking and for noticing, the way the light fell differently in every season, the way the mountains changed color in the afternoon. My Sundays were quieter still. Church in the morning, though I will confess my relationship with the institution had grown more complicated than it once was, while my relationship with what happens inside me during those hours of stillness had grown more essential. Then cooking, real cooking, the kind that takes all afternoon and fills the house with the kind of warmth that has nothing to do with temperature. This was my life. This was what I had built from the materials available to me, and none of it, not one Thursday, not one Tuesday, not one Friday morning with a child sounding out syllables with the concentration of a scholar. None of it had ever been mentioned to Denise because Denise had never asked. That evening, I called my friend Harriet. Harriet had been a family law attorney for 30 years before her retirement and remained sharper than most people half her age. She was the kind of friend you accumulate over a lifetime if you are lucky. The kind who tells you the truth without enjoying it, who asks the hard question and then waits quietly for the real answer. I told her everything. The announcement, the calendar, the babysitter they had already declined, the what else do you have going on? Harriet listened without interrupting, which was one of her great gifts. First question, she said when I finished. Do you want to help with those children? Of course I do, I said. On whose terms? I was quiet for a moment. Mine, I said. On mine. Good, said Harriet. Then let's talk about what that actually looks like. Harriet and I spoke for nearly 2 hours that night and again the following Thursday over lunch at the Italian restaurant on Merriman Avenue where we had been meeting for the better part of a decade. What emerged from those conversations was not a plan born of anger. I want to be precise about that because precision matters when people are inclined to misread a woman's firmness as bitterness. What emerged was a considered response to an unreasonable situation, thoughtful, documented, and entirely within my rights. The first thing I did was write down in the notebook I kept for important things a clear accounting of what I currently contributed to Marcus and Denise's household, not as ammunition, as clarity. Because I had spent enough years minimizing my own contribution that I had half forgotten its actual shape. In the previous 12 months, I had collected the children from school 43 times. I had provided meals on 17 occasions. I had taken at least one child to a medical appointment on 6 separate occasions because Denise had a conflict and Marcus was unreachable. I had purchased school supplies, birthday gifts for classmates, winter coats for 2 of the children when Denise mentioned casually that she hadn't got around to it yet. I had, in essence, been performing the role of the on-call grandmother with the reliability of a paid employee and none of the boundaries. I wrote all of it down. Then I closed the notebook and set it aside because the accounting was for my own understanding, not for presentation. This was not about scorekeeping. It was about seeing clearly. The second thing I did was write a letter. Not a legal document, not a formal complaint. A letter, the kind I used to teach my students to write when they had something important to say and needed to say it with both honesty and care. I wrote it by hand in the good pen I kept for things that deserved the good pen. on the cream-colored stationery I had bought years ago and rarely used because I was always waiting for an occasion important enough. This was important enough. I addressed it to Marcus. Not to Denise and Marcus, to Marcus. Because whatever conversation needed to happen, it needed to happen first with my son, in the privacy of a relationship that predated Denise by 31 years. The letter took 3 drafts and 2 evenings. I did not write in anger. I wrote in the measured cadence of someone who has thought carefully about what they mean and means exactly what they say. I told him I loved him. I told him I loved his children with a depth that surprised me still, even after 7 years of being their grandmother. I told him I was glad he had built a life that was full and that required so much of him. And then I told him, clearly and without apology, that I was not available to be a standing weekend childcare arrangement, that I had a life of my own, a life I had described in detail, the writing group, the watercolors, the Friday mornings at the school, the Saturdays at the farmer's market, the garden, the quiet that I had earned, and that this life was not a vacancy waiting to be filled by someone else's scheduling needs. I told him I would love to see the grandchildren regularly. I told him I was happy to discuss what that might look like in a way that worked for everyone. But I told him that any arrangement needed to be a conversation, not an announcement, that I was his mother, not a resource, that I deserved at minimum to be asked. I sealed the letter. I drove to his office on a Wednesday morning when I knew Denise would be at the children's school for a parent meeting and left it with his assistant, a kind young man named Trevor, who had always greeted me with warmth when I visited. Then I went to my watercolor class. I painted a very imperfect but genuinely felt study of the view from my garden. Constance, who sometimes dropped into the arts center when her schedule allowed, looked over my shoulder and said it had good bones. I went home and tended the roses. I did not call Marcus. I let the letter land and gave it room. Marcus called me on Friday evening. His voice had the particular quality it acquired when he was navigating between 2 difficult things, careful, measured, with an undercurrent of something he was working hard not to let surface. I recognized it from his childhood, from the evenings when he had done something he was not proud of and had decided to confess before I found out another way. "Mom," he said, "I got your letter." "I know," I said, a pause. "Denise is upset." "I imagine she is. She says you're being unreasonable, that she wasn't trying to, she didn't mean it the way you took it." I let that sit for a moment. Outside my window, the garden was settling into evening, the lavender going dark, the roses holding their color a little longer than everything else. "Marcus," I said, "how did she mean it?" Another pause, longer this time. She's overwhelmed. We both are. The kids are a lot. The new role is demanding. She wasn't trying to dismiss you." "I know she wasn't," I said, and I meant it. "But what else do you have going on is not a thoughtful question. It's an assumption. It assumes my time is empty. It assumes my life stopped having shape when I retired. It assumes I exist in relation to your family's needs rather than as a person with my own." Silence on the line. I could hear one of the children in the background. The twins, probably. They had a particular register of disagreement that was entirely their own. "You've never told us about any of that," Marcus said finally. "The writing group, the painting, I didn't know." "No," I said quietly, "you didn't, because you didn't ask." That landed. I could tell by the quality of the silence that followed. "I'm sorry, Mom. I know you are. What do you want to happen?" It was the right question. It was the question that should have been asked in Denise's kitchen before any of this began. I felt something loosen slightly in my chest. Not forgiveness exactly, not yet, but the beginning of the space in which forgiveness might eventually be possible. "I want to sit down with both of you," I said. "Not in Denise's kitchen with her laptop open to a calendar, at a table where we are all equally present. And I want us to have a real conversation about what I am able to offer and what I need in return, and what the children actually need from their grandmother, which is not a babysitter. It is a person who chooses to be present because she loves them, not because she has been scheduled." Marcus was quiet for a moment. "Denise isn't going to like hearing some of this." "I know," I said, "but Denise is going to have to hear it. Because what I will not do, Marcus, what I am not willing to do, is spend the years I have left being managed, I am your mother. I am those children's grandmother. I am also Gloria Reeves, and she has a life that matters." There was a long exhale on the other end of the line. "Okay," he said. "Sunday lunch. Here, I'll tell Denise." "Tell her I'll bring the lemon cake," I said. "The real one." Sunday lunch was not comfortable. I did not expect it to be, and I had not prepared for comfort. I had prepared for honesty, which is a different and more demanding thing. Denise received me at the door with the careful politeness of someone who has been spoken to by their spouse and is performing composure. She was wearing it the way people wear clothes that don't quite fit, correctly, but with visible effort. The children descended on me immediately, which was its own kind of grace. The twins wrapped themselves around my legs. The middle one, Josephine, 7 years old and already possessed of an inner life I found remarkable, pressed a drawing into my hands. It was a woman in a garden. There were roses. Above the woman, in Josephine's careful 7-year-old letters, it said, "Grandma Gloria's house." I looked at that drawing for a long moment. "It's your garden," Josephine said, in case I had not understood. "I know," I said. "It's beautiful." We ate lunch first because that was the right order of things. I had brought the lemon cake and a pot of soup I had made that morning, the slow kind, the kind that takes 4 hours and rewards patience. Denise accepted the soup with something that might, in better lighting, have been gratitude. Afterward, when Marcus had settled the younger children with a film in the living room and Josephine had been persuaded to join them with the promise that she could come back for cake, the 3 of us sat at the kitchen table. I had thought about how to begin. I had decided to begin simply. "I am not here to be unkind," I said. "I am here because I love this family, including you, Denise, and because I believe that the way we have been operating is not good for any of us. Not for me, not for you, and ultimately not for the children." Denise opened her mouth and then closed it. Marcus gave her a small look, not silencing, just steadying. "I don't think I was wrong to ask for help," Denise said finally. Her voice was more careful than I had heard it before, less certain. It was, I realized, the voice she used when she was genuinely uncertain rather than performing confidence. "We are drowning, Gloria. I don't know if you understand how much we are managing." "I do understand," I said. "More than you might think. I raised Marcus alone from the time he was 9. I understand what it is to manage more than is reasonable with less support than you need. I have genuine empathy for where you are." Something shifted in her face, just slightly, the shellac cracking a little. "But empathy," I continued, "does not mean I surrender my own life, and that is what was being asked of me. Not help. Surrender." The refrigerator hummed. A child laughed in the living room. "The way you said it," Marcus said quietly to Denise, not accusatory, just honest, "the way you said it to her, she's right that it wasn't a request." Denise looked at the table for a long moment. When she looked up, her eyes were bright in a way that told me she was working hard to hold something back. "I didn't think you'd mind," she said, and her voice was smaller than I had ever heard it. You always just do whatever we need. I didn't know you had all of that. The writing, the painting, I genuinely didn't know." "I know you didn't," I said. "That is also part of what we need to address." We talked for nearly 2 hours. It was not a smooth conversation. There were silences that lasted long enough to be uncomfortable and had to be waited out. There was a moment when Denise said something defensive and Marcus said her name in a way that redirected her, and a moment when I said something that was more blunt than I had intended and had to walk it back with care. But we talked. Actually talked. The way people talk when they have decided that the alternative, the accumulating silences, the small manageable resentments building into something structural, is worse than the discomfort of honesty. What I learned in those 2 hours changed the shape of my understanding. Denise's mother, Patricia, had been less available in recent months. She had her own health concerns, nothing critical, but enough to limit what she could offer. The network they had relied on had quietly contracted, and they had not told me because Denise found it difficult to ask for help from someone she admitted, not always treated with the generosity the situation required. The promotion had been more demanding than anticipated. Marcus had not told me the full extent of his work obligations because he did not want me to worry. They had been managing in that particular exhausting way that people manage when they are too proud or too private to let the people who love them see the actual shape of the struggle. I sat with all of that. I let it be complicated, because it was. I am not unwilling to help, I said, when it felt like the right moment. I am unwilling to be scheduled. There is a difference. What we arrived at by the end of that afternoon was not a resolution so much as a beginning. We agreed, the three of us at that table, without a laptop and without a calendar treated as a fait accompli, that I would spend time with the grandchildren on terms that honored both their need for me and my need for a life that remained mine. 2 Saturdays a month, mornings through early afternoon. Additional time when I chose to offer it and they chose to accept it. A real conversation before any arrangement was assumed, always. It sounds modest written down. It was not modest. It was the difference between being seen and being used. In the weeks that followed, something shifted in the household's orientation toward me. It was gradual, the way real change is always gradual, not a single dramatic alteration, but a series of small different choices accumulating into something new. Marcus called more often, not with logistics. Just to call, the way he used to before the firm, and the children and the years of quiet distance had made calling feel like something that needed a reason. Denise was different in a way I watched carefully before I trusted. She asked once about the memoir I was writing. The question was tentative, like a hand reaching toward something hot to test the temperature. I told her about Raymond, about the piece I was working on. I watched her face as I spoke, and what I saw there was not polite performance, but something more genuine. The specific attention of a person encountering for the first time the full dimensions of someone they had previously seen in 2 dimensions. I didn't know he died that way, she said, so suddenly. Most people don't, I said, because I am not someone who leads with her grief. She was quiet for a moment. I think I assumed you were, I don't know, just fixed. Like things that have been standing for a long time look fixed, even when they're not. It was the most honest thing she had ever said to me. I held it carefully. Josephine became my particular companion in those months. She was the child who most resembled what I imagine I was like at 7, curious about interior things, more interested in the why of situations than the what, drawn to any space where there was enough quiet to hear herself think. She began asking, on the Saturdays she spent in my garden, if she could help with the roses. I taught her how to deadhead the blooms, how to tell the difference between a healthy plant and one that needed more than it was getting, how to be gentle and deliberate rather than hasty, because roses remember rough handling. She was a serious and attentive student. Raymond would have loved her unreasonably. Harriet came for dinner one Thursday evening and listened to the update with the quiet satisfaction of someone who had already known how it would go but had the wisdom not to say so at the time. "You handled it right," she said. "I handled it eventually," I said. "It took 67 years. "Most things worth doing do," said Harriet, and refilled her wine. At Christmas, Denise gave me a gift that told me the conversation had reached her in a place deeper than I had dared hope. It was a set of high-quality watercolor paints, professional grade, the kind Constance had mentioned once in passing as superior to what the Arts Center provided. How Denise had known about Constance or the Arts Center or the quality of the paints I did not know. I suspected Marcus. I did not ask. Some things are better received than examined. I cried in the car on the way home, not from sadness, from the particular relief of being seen after a long time of invisibility, and the complicated beauty of it happening in a way I had not expected, and from a direction I had not anticipated. Josephine made me a card. On the front was a drawing of a woman in a garden with roses. Inside she had written in her careful, deliberate letters, "For Grandma Gloria who knows how to grow things." I framed it. It hangs now in the reading room next to the window that faces east. I have been thinking about what it means to become invisible. Not the dramatic invisibility of being ignored in a crowd or left out of a room, the quieter kind, the kind that happens slowly, in small increments, in the spaces between a family's busy days. You are there, and then you are background, and then you are infrastructure. Essential only when something goes wrong, but unnoticed when everything goes right. I think this happens to a great many people who love generously and assume, because the love is genuine, that those who receive it understand its full weight. We forget to say what we need because love, we were taught, does not come with conditions. We make ourselves small because we do not want to be the difficult one. We smile and nod and make our own tea and convince ourselves that being needed is the same as being valued. It is not the same, not even close. What I know at 67 that I did not know at 40 or 50 or even 60 is that the people who love us cannot see what we do not show them. They cannot ask about a life they do not know we are living. They cannot value what they have been allowed to take for granted. And so we must show them, not as performance, not as complaint, but as the simple and necessary act of being fully present in our own existence, of saying, I am here, I am whole, I have a life that matters and a self that deserves to be considered. Not despite my love for you, because of it. Because the best thing I can offer the people I love is a grandmother, a mother, a person who has not been emptied by obligation, but filled by choice. The roses in my garden bloom because I tend them, not because they demand attention, but because attention given freely and consistently produces beauty that surprises you, even when you are the one responsible for it. I think families are like that too when we let them be. What about you? Has there been a moment in your own life when someone you loved assumed your time was theirs to fill? When you were seen as available rather than asked if you were willing? I would love to know how you navigated it, because I believe that every person sitting with that particular quiet hurt deserves to know they are not alone in it, and that the way through is not silence and not anger, but the steady, courageous act of saying clearly who you are and what you need. That clarity is not selfishness. It is the foundation of every relationship worth having. If this story sat with you today, if any part of it felt familiar, felt close, felt like something you've been carrying without quite having the words for it, I hope you'll share your thoughts in the comments below. Your experience might be exactly what someone else needs to read this week. This channel exists because these stories matter. Because the quiet struggles of people who love generously and are taken for granted deserve to be spoken out loud, heard, and honored. If you would like to keep walking through these stories together, to sit each week with something honest and human and worth reflecting on, I would love to have you stay. Follow the channel so you don't miss what comes next. Because somewhere out there, the next story is already waiting, and it might be exactly the one you needed. I'll see you there.